Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Training Committee's programme of webinars for accredited caseworkers. And this afternoon's webinar is on school forums. I'd like to introduce myself and my colleague who've joining you this afternoon. My name is Damien McNulty. I'm the National Official for Salaries, Pensions and Conditions of Service. And with me this afternoon is Wayne Bates, who's one of our national negotiating officials for NASUWT. Wayne's going to share some slides with you. I'll introduce the first couple of slides, then we'll pass over to Wayne, and then we'll hand back over to myself. We'll take any questions at the end, so please do use the question and answers box on the bottom of your screen rather than the chat, if you would, please. And that's the introductory slide, which I've just covered. So what we will and won't be covering is set out in the next slide. And appreciate, as caseworkers, accredited caseworkers, some of you may already have some experience of your school forum, and others won't. So what we're going to cover in this webinar is the purpose and powers of school forums, how funding decisions affect school staff and members, and the trade union representation, rights and opportunities. In this webinar, we will not be covering a detailed understanding of all the school forum jargon. We will introduce some language and phrases that are specific to school forums, but not the full half dozen pages of abbreviations and associated language that goes with that. And for those of you that attend school forum currently, you'll be aware of much of that. And here's two that are coming along now in the next and final bullet point before I pass back to Wayne. We will not be covering in this webinar how the individual national funding formula, or NNF, components work. For example, the IDECI factors, which are the income deprivation affecting children's indices that are used to make up the national funding formula. So if you were hoping that we were going to go through a lot of technical detail, unfortunately not in this webinar, but we'd be very happy to come back to you or to pick up either in the questions and answers, or if necessary, a follow-up session on a more detailed overview of those aspects. So I'll pass over to Wayne and I'll put my mic on mute for now.
Thank you, Damien. So I guess the first question or questions is what's the purpose of school forums? They're a relatively new thing in the education world. They were introduced and established in 2002 in England under the Education Act, and then in 2003 in Wales under the Schools Forums Wales Regulations 2003. And to start with, they were fairly similar, but they have diverged quite markedly over the last 20 years or so. And I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail in a second. They are all statutory bodies. They all are set up by each local authority in England and Wales, and it is not an option whether a local authority has one or not. All local authorities must set up a schools forum, and their primary role is regarding consultations with schools on school funding and related financial matters. And this really, this slide shows how they are the same and how they differ. As I said, they have diverged over the last 20 years or so, and particularly in 2012. So in both England and Wales, there's a mandatory requirement to have schools forums. In Wales, they tend to be called either budget forums or school budget forums rather than just school forums. That tends to be what they're called in England, and that does reflect the different nature of what they are there to discuss. So the regulations that enforce in England, it did come in under the Education Act, but since has been reformed under the 2012 regulations. With regard to membership, in England, it is very clearly defined and structured under those regulations. It's a little bit looser in Wales, so the membership is locally determined, but within set parameters. So, for example, in Wales, no more than 25% of the members can be from the non-schools body, but there doesn't have to be anybody from the non-schools body at all. That would be unusual. And I think most, if not all, local authorities do have non-school members, but the number can vary within those set parameters. In terms of oversight in England, it is the Department for Education in Westminster. In Wales, it's the Welsh Government. And transparency is also quite different. So in England, schools forums are public meetings. The papers and minutes are all published. They're all public records. So anybody can go and sit in and listen and take part, well, not take part, but observe a schools forum meeting in England. In Wales, under the regulations, there's only mandatory reporting to school governing bodies. The Welsh Government recommends that websites are set up to publish the papers, minutes, agendas, etc. But it is only a recommendation. So it does vary from local authority to local authority. So if we look at the membership in a little bit more detail, so there must be representatives from maintained schools. Obviously in Wales, there is only maintained schools. In England, there is also a requirement to have representatives from academies, if there are any academies in that local authority area. Also early year providers and 16 to 19 education providers. There is also a group of non-school members. So those can be religious bodies, the private voluntary sector, and trade unions. Now, again, this is a point of divergence between Wales and England. In Wales, trade unions can sit as a full member of the schools forum or the budget forum with full rights. And in most local authorities, I believe it's NASUWT that actually has that seat. In England, we can attend, we can address and talk, and when I say we, that's trade unions, to the meeting, but we don't have any voting rights. And that was changed in 2012. That was the big change in 2012. So the makeup of the group must reflect the local makeup of education providers, and schools and academies in England must form a majority of the forum's membership. There's an elected chair, which can be from any group. And I said the meetings in England are public and the minutes published. It varies in Wales. So if we look now what the core roles and responsibilities of the schools forum are, and this is around the consultation that occurs with schools. So it is essentially all those funding matters. And again, there is a little bit of divergence between England and Wales. So we would expect to see discussions and agreements on local funding formula, contracts and financial arrangements, arrangements for early years and high needs funding, also contingencies, support groups, school improvement services. The big difference between Wales and England is around de-delegation decisions. So again, in 2012, there was a raft of funding items where that had previously been held by local authorities that were then delegated out to individual schools. And the one from a trade union point of view we're most interested in is trade union facility time. There are others, but I say the main one that concerns trade unions and NSWT was that delegation of facility time. And the rationale for that was clearly to try and break up the arrangements around facility time and make it harder for us to organise. That does not apply in Wales. So facility time and all those other things still sit with local authorities, and there is no dedelegation. So there are other things as well that will be discussed at those those budget forums in Wales, schools forums in England, such as behaviour support service, insurance, central administration. Now, facility time, I say, is probably the item that we as a union are most interested in when it comes to schools forums in England. And every year, the schools forum should discuss dedelegation. Now, the vast majority of schools and schools forums have agreed to dedelegate, i.e., put that facility time funding back into a central local authority pot. There are a handful that haven't, but on the NASUWT website, you will find a raft of detailed guidance around dedelegation and the arguments to have and the arguments to put forward at a schools forum meeting to ensure that the dedelegation, the dedelegation happens so the local authority maintains a central facility time fund or pot, and also around setting appropriate pupil rates for primary and secondary so that there is sufficient facility time. That facility time is obviously only for recognised unions, and where unions have members from both teaching and support staff, then the teacher facility time should only be used for teacher members, not support staff members. And it's important that with regard to dedelegation, that it is only local authority primary, secondary and special schools that can vote on dedelegation, because it's those schools that are impacted. So if the schools forum votes to dedelegate, then that will mean that all maintained schools within that local authority will have that funding dedelegated. Academies can choose whether to opt into that or not. So although the academy, there will be a member from one or more academies in the schools forum, they will not get a vote on the dedelegation because they still have the option to, even if dedelegation is agreed, then they will still have the option either not to abide by that, not to dedelegate, or to contribute. I'll hand that back over to Damien now for the next slides.
Thank you very much, Wayne. And I can see we do have some colleagues on the call from Wales, but I will just go back to that point that Wayne made around the dedelegation decisions for facility time, specifically in relation to academies. Outside of the school forum process, it's absolutely critical as the number of academies continue to increase, albeit slowly, that within the trade union recognition agreement, that there is a specific clause that compels the academy, as part of signing that trade union recognition agreement, that they will abide by the dedelegation decisions within each of the local authorities. So you will have some larger multi-academy trusts of schools in a number of authorities, certainly in the Northwest, where I was an activist up until joining the staff a few years ago. It wouldn't have been uncommon to have an academy trust employer with schools in 3 or 4 local authorities, and they would pay a slightly different rate per pupil for primary and secondary schools, and they were signed up to that as part of the trade union recognition agreement. So that's something to be mindful of as well within your local authority areas if you're in England. So moving on to the decision-making role, Wayne has talked in some detail about the dedelegation, but there are other dedelegated decisions to be made. And fundamentally, back in 2012, the then Conservative coalition government took the decision that all schools in England should receive almost 100% of all funding that they were due. Up until 2012, the local authorities, like they do in Wales, retained a proportion or percentage to run their central services. But with the advent of academisation and a more free market from the Conservative government's point of view, they wanted the schools to make determinations that were still local authority maintained schools about whether they would continue to buy back the behaviour support services as a traded service, whether they would make contributions to insurance, trading facility time, and there are a list of others as well. For example, the school meal service, that figure is set by each local authority, and papers are presented at schools forums, often very detailed papers and research with recommendations from a key senior local authority official. However, local authorities are only allowed to recover their costs. They're not allowed to make a profit. So if it costs them £100,000 to deliver the school meal service, that's all they can charge the schools. They can't work on a for-profit basis, and that's an important factor to remember again, particularly in England, but where there are those dedelegation decisions, because we're starting to see with at least one reform-led council, Kent County Council, where they're trying to pass on some costs that we don't believe are fair and should be challenged, and we're providing some support to our colleagues in that particular set of circumstances. And it's highly likely for those of you that are in local authority areas, one of the other 10 local authority areas with a reform council, or perhaps you're a staff member or a national executive member in those areas, you'll be receiving guidance in the coming weeks about what needs to be challenged and what you need to be alert for that's coming through those school forums, potentially as a political choice by reform local councillors who lead in those areas. There are central expenditure limits that those are decided if funds can be retained centrally. That's often for school improvement services. An awful lot of local authorities now have moved away from providing their own education improvement service or school advisors. It's a bit of a patchwork quilt now in terms of where that's provided. Some schools do that directly or use the funding they receive to purchase their own equivalent, or maybe in a cluster of schools in a geographical area within a local authority. There's also decisions made at school forums around growth funding and falling role funds. Now, there are formulas that are agreed and allocated, and we, as one of the recognised trade unions, do attend a meeting every 2 months that's called the School Academies and Funding Group, where we get briefed on the decisions that are coming down the line in the coming year or sometimes in the next 2 years about what's going to happen in terms of allocations by the Department for Education via the national funding formula or a specific funding line to school forums that they can either use for growth funding if there's an increase in demand for secondary places or perhaps primary places, which there are on occasion. But sadly, and it's becoming ever more apparent, particularly in the Northeast, particularly in London boroughs, where falling roles are becoming an ongoing and persistent problem. And the Department for Education has allocated additional funding for those falling roles, with some guidance around the options that school forums have to consider. So again, really important that we have some eyes and ears in those school forum meetings, or more importantly, in advance of the meetings that when they take place, that you've been able to cast your eye through the key elements of the papers to see if there are any decisions that are coming up which inevitably, undoubtedly, will impact on our members. Okay, Wayne, may I have the next slide, please? So the overarching blocks that the funding that local authorities get for their maintained schools comes in under the heading of Dedicated Schools Grant, or DSG. And for those of you that attend school forums or know NASUWT members or other trade union officials in your areas that attend school forums, you will hear them use phrases and often the abbreviations when they talk about elements to do with school forums. Those are split into four blocks. The schools block, which unsurprisingly goes to the local authority maintained schools, primaries and secondaries. The high needs block, which is the allocation for the special needs schools predominantly. The early years block, and that varies in size depending on how many school-based nursery places there are, for example. There are a couple of local authorities, like the one I used to work in Knowsley, where almost every primary school has a school-based nursery, and there's a very small private voluntary independent nursery sector or PVI sector. And then there's the central school services block. Again, that's a fairly small proportion of most local authorities because that's the bit that they use to pay the school improvement officers, probably the director of education's salary, and any kind of lead officials that look after education, discreetly education provision. We've had this week released the funding for 26-27 for three of those four blocks. We've had the funding allocation for everything apart from the high needs block. We've been promised it at some point in the future, but no date as yet. And that's unusual. We think that's because it's likely to be linked to the delayed white paper on SEND, special educational needs and disabilities in England, and or it could be something that's going to appear in the Chancellor's autumn budget statement next week. Probably the former rather than the latter. So the increase in funding for 2026-27 for those other three areas amounts to an increase of 2.11% for the financial year 26-27. Okay, Wayne, next slide, please. So the National Funding Formula, or NNF, was first established in 2028, and it determines how much each local authority receives. Up to that point, and Wayne gave you a little bit of the history of school forums whenever they were first created, back in 2002 in England and 2003 in Wales. Up to that point, up to 2018, the amount that was received by each school had a long historic tail and hadn't been reviewed. In 2018, the then Conservative-only government introduced a national funding formula, which was supposed to help level the playing field from their, to use their phrase, and to ensure that there wasn't so much variation between how primary and secondary school pupils were funded. And one of the things they also did in 2018 with the Key Stage 5 funding was significantly reduce that as a per pupil amount, where it was comparable to Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 per pupil funding rates in schools. It has become about 25% of its original value, which is why so many schools with sixth form provisions are struggling to make the books balance, because in effect, the only way, unless they've got a very full sixth form, probably of 200 children or more in year 12 and year 13 combined, almost certainly the Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 budget's going to have to subsidise that. Anyway, to go back, the local authority formulas were introduced, and there was still a wide variation. I mean, I'm sure you can anticipate that, for example, in inner London, where the pay rates are higher for teachers, and you'll know that there's the same pay scale, but the values are slightly higher than they are for the rest of England, and Wales as well. The per pupil amount is bound to be higher to help the schools pay the additional costs of the wage bill. The introduction of the national funding formula, however, has led to some inequalities, and schools with similar characteristics in different areas continue, maybe not the very large differences that used to be in place before 2018, but it's been reducing since 2018. And the national funding formula was introduced by the DFE in a way to make things fairer, also more transparent and consistent across the country. Thank you, Wayne. So in terms of timelines, the national funding formula was introduced there back in 2018-19. And this is how each local authority distributes funds to schools. The government does intend to move to a hard national funding formula where funding is allocated directly to schools, bypassing school forums and local authorities for local authority maintained schools. And it was initially expected to be around 2026. Obviously, we've had a change of government since the planned introduction or direct funding of schools, like academies are directly funded. But what we have got is a commitment from the Labour government to review the national funding formula sometime during this Parliament. No dates yet. Thank you, Wayne. So just to give you a sense of scale, and there is a much longer list of winners and losers on the national funding formula. You can see there that there are a number of areas that were significant winners. So Derby, York, Torbay, Somerset, Barnsley, Plymouth, and so on, all received an increase of more than 2% in their funding. Those are not insignificant sums because we're talking in most of those local authorities, hundreds of millions of pounds worth of allocation for all the maintained schools in those areas. And you can see in terms of the top 10 losers, many, but not all, many are in and around the London area. So that was a way of rebalancing some of those funding issues that were in place prior to 2018. Now this has smoothed things out, but there are still, and many of you will know this, but also school leaders do talk about it frequently, and rightly so, because school budgets are so tight. Every 0.0 something of a percentage point in school funding terms makes a real difference in terms of whether schools can balance their budgets or not. So any variation or any perceived unfairness is definitely something that school leaders do want to talk about. There is a group, and again, some of you may be familiar with this group. I'm not going to get into any details of this, but there is an F40 group that are made up of the 43 lowest per pupil funded local authorities, and they come together fairly regularly to plead their case to government for an equal distribution for every school in the country. But again, you'll all be aware, I've no doubt, that in different areas there are different factors that, for example, unemployment, deprivation, housing, unemployment, all of those factors are weighted into the national funding formula through those IDACI factors, which we won't cover in any detail today, but we can pick up at a later date if you wish. Thank you, Wayne. So in terms of challenges and good practices, I mean, some of the common challenges are managing the tensions between the maintained sector and the academy sector. Wayne's already clearly mentioned that there are elements of de-delegation, specifically facility time funding, that academies don't get the vote on. And that is a source of tension because particularly for those academies, and we have many academy trusts with good industrial relations where they have committed in their trade union recognition agreements to pay into the local authority's facility pot based on the decisions made by the maintained schools in those areas. But again, the tensions come because, again, unsurprisingly, as school budgets get tighter, people look to see where they can save some pounds. Balancing the priorities and the amid funding pressures. Again, you need to probably have been living on the moon for the last few years to not have heard about the funding pressures in the high needs and the special educational needs sector in your own local authority. And a great deal of the time in school forums over the last few years have been looking at the challenges, particularly around high needs blocks and how those are funded. Now, there is facility for with the agreement of all representatives of the school forum to move money from the central, sorry, not the central schools block, the schools block funding, one of the four components, the largest of the four components, to move up to 0.5% of that total sum of money into the high needs block to assist the special needs sector. Now, you might have a view on that that's informed by your moral compass in terms of what you think is appropriate in your local authority. You may have a view about, well, I work in the special needs sector and absolutely this is really important, or perhaps you've got some family or friends that are receiving education within the special needs sector, and you know that all the funding they receive is really, really important. Or you may feel that your local maintained schools, primaries and secondaries, are having a really hard time of it, and it's not for them to be propping up an underfunded special educational needs side. So there's some real key issues discussed in that space. And another common challenge is ensuring that members of school forums understand the complex funding formulas. Now, the good news is that there is a requirement for school forums to train all their representatives. The bad news is in England, since 2012, trade unions don't have a representative, an elected representative role within a school forum. But experience does suggest, not just my own experience, but experience does suggest across a number of local authorities that the local authority schools finance manager is really, really keen to help people who don't understand items within papers and why numbers are in a particular place and what they mean and what some of these terms are. They really do like to try and explain those things to you. It's not they don't see it as a chore. They see it as a challenge with a smile on their face because they're up close and personal with those numbers, and they know if they can explain it to a lay person, someone who's not living and breathing the detail like them, that helps them do their job when they meet with others in the education sphere. Now, in terms of good practice examples, transparent reporting by local authorities is really important. If you've never seen or you haven't had access to school forum papers for your local authority, then get Googling the name of your local authority and school forum. They should be freely available. Wayne has rightly identified and told you already that there are public meetings. So they should be on the list of other meetings, other council meetings, like the scrutiny committee, the planning committee, the licensing committee. You might find them on the same web page as that. Really important as well that there's clear communication between the forum and local schools. So if you're, as many of you will be, in fact, all of you should be, I guess, as accredited lay caseworkers, you work in schools, your head teacher and/or governing body should receive some form of a report about key decisions that are coming up or have been taken by the school forum. And again, I've mentioned there's training for school forum members on interpreting data and budgets. And while we don't have those representative rights anymore, it is often the case that that training will be extended to trade unions as a social partner, if not allowed constitutionally to have that right within school forums. Thank you, Wayne. So other examples, oh, that's the same slide. My apologies. I've duplicated the slide. Getting towards the end now, so we'll open things up to questions and answers. I can see that there is a question in there. I've not read it yet, but if you have questions on anything we've said, please do start to get them in there. So trade union representation, rights and opportunities. Wayne did say in his opening that anyone can attend a school forum meeting. You do need to negotiate speaking rights with the chair, as it's not an elected role. They won't just let any member of the public speak. But it's not that you're going to want to speak on every single issue. But if you do indicate to the chair, perhaps in advance of the meeting, that you'd like to speak on a specific issue, perhaps to give NASUWT's policy position on something, to make a point of clarification, that that you feel will be helpful for those that are making the decision, then as long as you don't abuse those speaking rights, chairs are pretty liberal with that engagement, because they do know that anyone that is in attendance, particularly from a trade union, is likely to have an informed view and opinion to put forward. So there's tons of opportunities with School Forum. Those of you that already attend will know this. You get advance warning of decisions and changes to funding that are coming down the line that will affect members in the next couple of months, perhaps in the next 6 months or 12 months. And that will help you in perhaps your local branch meetings, with putting messages out through your newsletters, but also to prepare the sector for what's coming next. School forums, one of the things that I always looked out for, and it was a good early warning system, was the budget outturns and the reserve positions or deficit positions of each of the local authority maintained schools, the primaries, the secondary, and the special schools. That's all part of the public record. You don't have to ask the individual schools. You get that collated annually in one of the through the cycle of the school forum meetings. If speaking rights have been secured, then NASUWT's policy position can be put forward before decisions are taken. And I think, Wayne, that's the last of the slides. I could be wrong. Oh no, I'm wrong. So the chair doesn't have to give you speaking rights, but they should be open to persuasion. I've already mentioned about the local finance officer, and they are an invaluable resource. You don't have to do this necessarily in the meeting, but drop them an email or perhaps pick the phone up and have a conversation. I mean, you're as accredited caseworkers, you'll already be familiar with how you can foster relations with those that could be of assistance to you. It would be ideal. In an ideal world, it would be great to have someone within each local association that does keep a watching brief on what does happen at school forums. The meetings are have often since COVID remained online. They're virtual meetings, so you don't have to physically attend those meetings. It will vary by local authority, but at the very least, it's worth having a skim through the key recommendations that are coming up. And it may be that you think, well, there's nothing there that's really going to affect our members on this particular agenda. But you may spot something and you think, you know what, be really important to get someone from the NASUWT local branch along to that meeting to put forward our view and opinion. Thank you, Wayne. Okay. Sharon Daly's asked, will we receive a copy of the presentation at the end? Yes, I don't see that as a problem. We'll ask our colleagues who are hosting, and they have the contact details of who's registered, to send that out to all of you who are in attendance. Karen McDonald, hi Karen. What would the proposed hard model of NNF directly to schools mean for trade unions? Well, it would mean that we would almost certainly need to be negotiating at an individual school level, as we do with the academy trusts, by way of a commitment to buying back into the local facility time pot. But Karen, that's not something that can happen overnight. It would take a period of consultation and reconfiguring the funding and the mechanisms for allocating that funding from the DFE. So almost certainly there would be a 2, 3, 4 year lead-in time before anything like that would happen, and we would have plenty of time to prepare the ground and support local branches in continuing to secure the facility time arrangements that many of you currently are in receipt of. Okay, folks. I'm not seeing any more questions. I can see Sharon's thank you. And for those of you that haven't already seen Sharon Daly's excellent pop-up on Instagram, short video feed on the application of TLRs, particularly in primary schools, I'd urge you to get onto the national Facebook page for NASUWT or the national Instagram page and have a look at that and disseminate that across your local branches. Really, really important piece of advice and guidance and some victories that have been shared there. I've been asked also to remind you that next week there is an accredited caseworker webinar for ECTs in England only for caseworkers. If you wish to attend, then please do get registered and share that out amongst your other accredited casework colleagues where applicable in your local associations. Wayne, I'm going to stop talking now and give you the opportunity to follow up with anything that you've thought of as we've been talking, or any other points you want to underline or go back to.
No, I think there's nothing that I need to come in with now. I think I can't see any more questions that have come in either. Right.
As that seems to have reached a natural conclusion, then we're going to sign off and leave you to the rest of your Friday afternoon. Oh,